Glasses chimed like alarms when my daughter stood. The band cut off. Forks froze. And in the chandelier's light, she lifted a champagne flute and a cream envelope sealed with my late husband's red wax. I knew that seal. So did my son, the groom, whose smile thinned into warning. "To my brother," she said, bright, practiced. To love, to loyalty, to family. People relaxed. Then she tapped the envelope against her glass, a tiny gavel. "But tonight," she added, "let's speak about the will Father never wanted you to know about." The gasp moved like a wind. A fork fell, the bride's veil trembled. My son half stood, then sat, jaw-jumping. I didn't move. I laced my fingers until my knuckles ached. I would not perform panic. Silence had been my jewelry for years. Admired, constricting. She slid a finger under the flap. Paper scraped like a door I should have opened long ago. "Since we're toasting loyalty," my daughter said, "let's define it." She read clauses, dates, and the sentence that handed control of the estate to my son in light of concerns regarding the maturity and judgment of the younger heir. She didn't look at him when she said concerns. She looked at me. "You need to know how we reached that cliff. Before the toasts, we were the picture people post online. White linens, smiling siblings, me centered and steady. My husband adored our son and loved our daughter like late winter. Thin light, many apologies. He wasn't cruel. Favoritism rarely names itself. It calls itself practical. When he died, we read the official will in his study with the chessboard still mid-game. It was fair enough to mend us. My son nodded, my daughter cried. I made tea. Then whispers. Drafts. A contingency no one admitted existed. I found fragments by accident. An email subject line, a PDF name, pairing his initials with words like reallocation and protection. When I asked my son, he smiled with his father's confidence and none of his softness. "You're worrying over smoke," he said. "Dad wanted me to handle things. For everyone's good." Back in the ballroom, copies passed down the tables like hymnals. The planner hovered near the band, deciding which corner of the fire to smother. My son rose, palms down. "Enough," he said, even, reasonable. "This is a misunderstanding and not the time." "It's exactly the time," my daughter answered, her steadiness more frightening than any shout. She had lived in low light. Now she brought a switch. I should have been beside her. Instead, I searched my son's face for the boy who kissed my cheek with jelly and found the man who can't resist a story he controls. "Mama knew," he added too casually. Heads turned. Heat climbed my neck. "No," I said. The word was small and it rang. My daughter's gaze steadied like a hand on a railing. In one heartbeat, I wanted to gather every time I'd told her to be the bigger person and set those moments on fire. She raised her glass. Light slid along the crystal like a blade. "I kept quiet for years," she said. "Peace built on a lie is just polite war." Petals slumped from the arch. The injustice took the head seat. A secret will that turned my daughter into a beneficiary at my son's discretion. If he decided she was immature, ungrateful, difficult, she could be erased with a signature. I recognized the cadence of certain accusations. They were mine from tired nights. I had offered adjectives. They became a blade. Silence is not neutral. Mine patted my son's steps while sanding my daughter's voice to a whisper. I told myself I balanced the scales. I was the scale. And I leaned, the groom's side murmured. The bride's father stood. "Is there an attorney present?" Hands lifted, my son tried charm. "Dad was protecting the family," he said. "My sister has made choices. Like believing I deserve what my father promised," my daughter said. "Like wanting a mother who doesn't barter me for quiet." Her voice didn't shake. Mine almost did. I pressed my thumb into the cracked wax, remembering winter in the study when my husband asked me to trust him. I did. Trust without verification is worship. Worship excuses the people we love from scrutiny. "Let her finish," I said. It sounded like a sentence passed. My son stared as if I'd stepped out of costume. "Mom," he murmured, "don't do this. Not for her. Not here. For her." as if she were a stranger at our table. My daughter drew a breath that started years back. "Loyalty isn't obedience," she told the room. "It's telling the truth when lies are expensive." She touched the last page, my husband's signature curling like a promise. Clause 14. The executor may withhold distributions if the younger heir displays lack of judgment. She raised her head. Which means disagreement becomes immaturity, and immaturity becomes starvation. The bride's mother found her pearls and clutched them, staring at me as though I'd tied the knot. I didn't apologize. I didn't stand. I didn't smooth. I let the ugliness breathe. I had taught my daughter to lower her voice. Tonight she raised mine. "Finish," I told her, hearing my mother's iron in my mouth. Relief softened her face, not triumph. She looked past me at her brother and at the broken seal that had finally done its job. Mark what cannot be unseen. The band pretended to tune. The room leaned forward. If you think the story began with her toast, you're wrong. That was the whistle. The train had been moving for years, built from my choices to keep the picture pretty, diplomacy over fairness, quiet over questions, a piece that charged interest. As my daughter lifted the page again, ready to tell them what happened in the study the winter after the funeral, I understood the true beginning sat behind us. Waiting for the night, I chose silence instead of storm. I used to believe every family had its shadows. That ours were no different, just the quiet, ordinary ones people ignore at Sunday dinners. But shadows have weight when you grow up inside them, pressed down by someone else's light. My brother was born first, and with him came the crown. "He's the heir," my father used to say, smiling like it was destiny, not choice. When I was born, there were congratulations, of course, but softer, almost perfunctory. I was the afterthought, the accessory to his legacy. At family gatherings, people bragged about my brother's grades, his talent, his leadership. My accomplishments were politely acknowledged, then swept aside like crumbs on a tablecloth. It wasn't just favoritism, it was expectation. I learned early that silence was my assigned role. If I spoke up, I was emotional. If I disagreed, I was difficult. My brother could rage and still be forgiven. I had to whisper gratitude for scraps of approval. When Father passed, the grief was real, but so was the unspoken shift. In his study, with the book smelling faintly of tobacco and the chessboard still mid-game, we read the will. For once it seemed fair. Assets split between us, provisions for both families, words that hinted at balance. For a fragile moment, I believed maybe Father had seen me after all, but whispers slithered almost immediately. A draft, a revision, a document hidden behind locked drawers. The kind of will where fairness disappeared and my daughter's name vanished entirely. It was my brother's voice that carried those whispers, low and coaxing, like smoke creeping under a door. "You're imagining things," he told me once when I pressed him. "Dad knew you couldn't handle responsibility. He trusted me, for everyone's sake." His tone wasn't cruel. It was reasonable, calm, as though reason itself belonged to him. That was his gift, making you doubt your own memory, your own worth. But the cruelty grew sharper when directed at my daughter. She was still young when he first cornered her in the hallway of our house during a holiday dinner. "You're not really family," he whispered, so softly no one else could hear. "You don't deserve what's ours," she told me later in a trembling voice, but I hushed her. "He doesn't mean it. He's just stressed." I thought I was protecting her, smoothing edges for the sake of peace. What I didn't see was how silence validated his poison. Every time I told her to ignore him, I taught her to swallow humiliation like medicine. I watched her dim herself, shrinking around him, careful not to provoke. She'd sit at dinners with her fork poised, lips pressed together, while my brother basked in Father's chair as though he had always owned it. I convinced myself this was survival, that one day balance would restore itself. But balance doesn't arrive uninvited. It's claimed. What I didn't know, what she never told me, was that my daughter had been gathering proof all along. Letters my brother left unattended, drafts of wills he thought destroyed, email chains between him and Father's lawyer. full of suggestions about protecting family wealth from instability. She saved them quietly, carefully, as if each file were a brick in the wall she would one day build. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. And patience, I would learn, can be sharper than rage. The breaking point didn't come in a screaming match or slammed doors. It came in her decision to choose the most public stage imaginable, her brother's wedding. A place where unity was rehearsed like a play, where no one dared break the script. She knew if she spoke then, in front of chandeliers and champagne, the truth couldn't be buried again. I remember the moment she told me. It was the night before, in her room, where her dress hung like a ghost against the closet door. She sat at her desk, laptop open, papers spread like wings. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'm telling them." Fear knotted my chest. "At the wedding? That's madness. You'll ruin everything." She looked at me then, not like a daughter asking permission, but like a woman daring me to deny her truth. "It's already ruined, Mom. Pretending it isn't doesn't save me. It only saves him." I had no answer, only the shame of realizing she was right. My silence had always been for him, so I didn't stop her. I didn't bless her either. I simply sat beside her, torn between pride and dread. I thought of the guests, the bride's family, the endless ripples of scandal. And yet, beneath the fear, a small flame of admiration burned. She was about to do what I never had, break the silence in daylight. Section 3. The Reckoning. The ballroom no longer felt like a wedding. It felt like a trial. Guests whispered in frantic clusters, phones discreetly raised to record, as if truth needed digital proof to matter. The bride's father barked for quiet while the band froze mid-note, instruments held like shields. My son, the groom, stood at the center, sweat shining at his temples, insisting it was all lies. But my daughter was ready. From her clutch, she drew folded pages, copies of the drafts he thought he'd hidden. Her voice never wavered as she read aloud the emails. His name beside phrases like limit liability, restrict distributions, and ensure sole control. The silence after each line was deafening, broken only by gasps and the rustle of chairs. The bride's family turned pale. "Is this what we married into?" the mother whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bride herself swayed as if the ground beneath her vows had cracked open. Inside me, the conflict raged. One child trembling but brave, weaponizing truth. The other cornered, snarling, desperate to maintain his golden image. I wanted to protect them both, to gather them as I once did after childhood quarrels. But protection had become poison. Protecting one meant betraying the other. And I could no longer betray my daughter. My son's composure shattered. "You don't understand," he shouted, voice cracking. Father wanted me to lead. "She's unstable, she's jealous." He gestured wildly toward his sister, but the room recoiled. Every denial sounded less like defense and more like confession. His rage, once forgiven as passion, now looked like guilt dressed in panic. My daughter, though, she was a portrait of calm. Her hands did not shake as she placed the documents on the table for all to see. "I am not unstable," she said softly. "I am simply done being silent." The contrast between them was undeniable. His fury painted him guilty. Her composure crowned her credible. For years she had been humiliated, dismissed, erased. Tonight she stood taller than her brother ever had. I rose then, my voice cutting through the storm. "She speaks the truth." My words hung in the air, heavy, irreversible. Gasps rippled again, but this time it was my son who paled. For the first time I had chosen sides. For the first time I had chosen her. And in that moment, the secret will lost its power. Once dragged into light, it became nothing more than paper, ugly, incriminating paper. The brother who once commanded respect now stood stripped of it, his allies evaporating with every revealed detail. His bride's family pulled away, their smiles replaced with cold calculation. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives in a steady voice, in evidence spread on a linen table, in a mother saying, "Enough." My daughter had carried the humiliation for years. Tonight she carried victory. I looked at her then and saw not only my child but the woman she had become, the woman I should have been when I was her age. Her strength mirrored the voice I had buried inside myself for decades. By standing with her, I reclaimed it. Family can wound deeper than strangers, but it can also heal when truth is finally spoken. Betrayal had cost us years of love, but honesty, though messy, though public, was the only path forward. And in that room of shattered glass and wilted flowers, I understood the price was worth it. To anyone listening who has been silenced, who has swallowed lies to keep peace, know this. You are not alone. Speak, even if your voice trembles. Stand, even if your knees shake. There is freedom in the fallout. If you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you, take my story as proof. Silence can be broken, and justice can be found. Subscribe to my channel for more stories like mine, where wounds are exposed, voices rise, and truth finally wins. The next evening, when she lifted her glass and the room froze, I felt both terror and relief. Terror at what chaos would follow, and relief that finally the weight wasn't mine alone. She was carrying it too, but not as a burden, as a weapon. What happened next turned the wedding into a battlefield no one could ignore. And it began with the words I'd been too afraid to say, spoken from my daughter's mouth, steady as iron.